Your car guy here. Today we're working on a 2008 Honda Civic and we're going to change the water pump. Water pump has developed a small leak at the weep hole, and I'll show you that as we work forward. And the water pump, you can see, is mounted right down here. It's this pulley that has the 3 bolts sticking out. So we're gonna do a couple of things real quick. We'll drain some coolant so that we don't make a mess on the ground. We're gonna go ahead and take loose the bolts that mount that pulley before we take the belt off. And the reason why we do that is because the belt will actually help hold some tension on the pulley so that we can get those bolts broke loose. Then we'll take the belt off and remove the water pump. Now, when I say we have a water pump leaking at the weep hole, let me show you what I mean. Your water pumps are built with a designed-in leak point. This hole right here, which is ahead of the seal, what it does is it lets you know when the bearing of the water pump's wearing out. It'll go through the seal, it'll leak so that you know that the pump is failing. So you know when you get a leak here, and it'll show up, and I don't know if you can really see it, but down there on the bottom tray there's a damp spot right down in there that shows up, and that's how you know it's time to change the water pump before it has a catastrophic failure. So we'll get started. Like I said, first things first, we're going to drain some coolant. And if you look from above, there's a hole in the tray right down below us, straight down there. And right up in that, you can just see it there, it's kind of hard to focus on, is a petcock valve. You simply open that petcock and it'll drain the radiator right into a tray. So we're going to get a tray under there, start draining some coolant. Okay, I showed you through the top that there's a hole that you can reach the petcock through. Underneath, it's right there. And I've got my tray in place, and you can simply reach up in and turn that petcock to open it. Now, I'm going to be turning it counterclockwise, but because it's reversed from where I am, it seems like it's clockwise, but I'm really turning it counterclockwise. Simply open it up and start draining it into a pan. Now what I'll want to do to make it drain a little faster is go ahead and take the radiator cap off. That'll allow some air ingestion into the coolant system so that it'll drain more quickly. Okay, I'm going to break loose my pulley bolts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a wrench and use the boxed in and cover, and I've already broken this one loose, but then I'll grab my next one and I'll pull up, and it's probably going to rotate the water pump around because the belt isn't quite tight enough. But when I get it into a good position, then I can take my other hand and kind of squeeze down on the belt. That'll lock it in place, and then I can pull and break loose my bolts in the pulley. Now that I have my pulley bolts loose, I'm going to put my 19mm wrench onto the tensioner bolt right here, and I'm going to press it towards the windshield of the car to release tension off of the belt, and then I can simply, while I'm holding it out, pull the belt off of the alternator here, and we'll have the belt out of our way. Okay, you can see I've pulled the belt right off after pushing the tensioner up. Note, the tensioner is going to be difficult to push. It'll feel like it doesn't want to move at first, but just push it up, and it doesn't have to move far to get enough to be able to remove the belt then and get it out of your way. Once the belt's out of our way, we can get to work. Now, it's a good idea before you remove the belt to just kind of take note of how it's routed. One thing to remember, if it's a smooth pulley, meaning no teeth on it, the back side of the belt, or the side with no teeth, is going to go across it. And if it's a tooth pulley, the inside of the belt with the teeth is going to go on it. Now that the belt is out of your way, take and finish removing the bolts for the pulley so that you can remove the pulley. With the pulley removed from the water pump, we can see there's other things that we're going to have to take out. One of them is going to be the tensioner, because it is covering this top part of the water pump here. And we're also going to go ahead and remove the alternator to give us some more clearance to work. First things first, when you pull the alternator, remove the negative post on your battery. 10mm nut, remove that, put it to the side so it's not going to reattach. Then we're going to come over here to the alternator. We're going to unplug. This is the air conditioning connection for the AC compressor, the plug for the alternator control, and the main battery wire. We'll also disconnect this wire here by simply pushing that clip to the side to disconnect it, because that's going to stay on the alternator, that bracket. We'll have a bolt here and another bolt underneath here to dismount the alternator. We will need to make sure, and you got two ways. You can either cut the zip tie here or take out this bolt for that bracket and these two bolts for this bracket, because this piece is going to stay on with the alternator if you don't, because it is tied into those brackets. So you can remove these three bolts, leave the zip ties connected. You can also either remove this bolt here at the connector, or you can simply press that tab in right underneath there. You'll see I've got it compressed, and then slide this whole thing back off of this bracket. So once you're disconnected here, so we unplug that, we can press that tab. I'm gonna try to get a better view here. Press this tab and slide to disconnect from that. This is gonna have a 10mm nut underneath for the main battery connection. This one is gonna be a squeeze lock underneath here. So if we pull up our rubber, you'll see you have a locking tab underneath right in that point there that you can actually press from above and press it, or slide your rubber up, press that and pull this straight up. So pressing right here and pulling up, it's going to require two hands. With my wiring disconnected, I can see that I've got a 12mm bolt here to take out, and then the other one is almost directly below the alternator pulley. And if I use a little bit of a deep well socket, I can reach in there and it's very easy to get to. Here's the view with my socket on the lower bolt, and you can see where it's at so that you can get to it. Very easy, as long as you're using a deep well. You might have a room enough for a shallow with an extension, but it's going to be tight. With the two alternator mounting bolts removed, I can use a pry bar right into this slot behind the alternator and simply pry it away in order to free it up. Just work it back and forth gently. We can see we have much better room and access to see our water pump and to see our challenges with our tensioner that is blocking the water pump from being able to come off. So we'll remove this bolt here for the tensioner, which is the shock absorber, or the actual what's creating the tension on the tensioner, and then we'll remove the pivot bolt and the tensioner will be able to come out of our way. And this tensioner bolt is a 12mm. We're simply going to loosen it up, and then we'll have the tensioner free to where we can work with it. Okay, I've stuck my 8mm Allen driver in the pivot bolt so you can see where it is. And yes, it is an Allen. So if you don't have an 8mm Allen, you're not going to get this job done. Now I can simply attach my ratchet and take that out. Okay, I've undid the 8mm Allen bolt, and now I'm going to actually rotate the whole tensioner up around the water pump in order to remove it through the top here. That makes it easy, and I'm going to give you a view. There's your 8mm Allen, and here's the driver that I was using to remove it. Now that that's removed, we have full access to get to all of our water pump bolts and remove our water pump, and it's going to come out right through the top here. Now I'm going to note something for you. Just because we drained the radiator fully does not mean that we've drained the block. There will be coolant up in this water pump, and if you look below, hey, there's our nice coolant leak that's been coming out the bottom of this water pump, out the weep hole. So we're going to undo our water pump bolts, and here with our new water pump you can see exactly where they're all going to be. So you'll have your three that you can see on this side up here, 1, 2, and 3, and then on the back side you're going to have 2 more for a total of 5. Once you get those 5 out, you can pop the or the water pump out. Good idea. Go ahead and put a drain pan underneath there, because The lower radiator hose connects all the way up here, fairly high on the engine. So even though our radiator's drained, we're still going to have coolant in the block. So when we pop that out, it's going to give a big gush of coolant. Now these are 10mm bolts. We'll get the 5 of them out and we'll remove the water pump. Now that I have all the bolts out, you can see we do have coolant coming out. And when I open that up, there's a nice gush of coolant all draining. Now I've put my pan under there already, so to catch it all, I can just bring my water pump out the top here. And here, you see that nice evidence, that black streak of where it's been leaking out of this weep hole, telling me that, hey, this water pump has indeed failed. And we're going to put a new one on. Now, great thing, I love Honda. They use an O-ring seal. The old O-ring just stuck to the body of the front cover there. Just peel that off. Make sure before you go to put your new one on that you've made sure there's no junk or anything on this sealing surface where that O-ring was. If you need to, just give it a little bit of a scrape, but be careful not to gouge the aluminum and create a leak path. Okay, the new water pump comes with a new O-ring seal, depending on who you buy from. I know I bought it at my local parts store, and I bought a new, not a remanufactured water pump. It ran about $70 and has a lifetime warranty. So I'm going to take and put the O-ring in the channel on the water pump before I set it in the vehicle. That way I make sure that it's in place, and I'm going to watch to make sure I don't roll it when I put it on. So I'll put it all in the channel, and you see there's a channel built into the water pump for the O-ring to set in. And here you go. There's the O-ring sitting in the channel. I'm just going to make sure it doesn't fall out while I'm setting it in, and I'm going to hold it in place and get some bolts started and just use my fingers to snug them down so that I make sure that it's held in place and I don't roll it to get a leak. Notice I'm not using any sealer here at all, and you can see the O-ring actually sticks up above the body of the water pump so that it'll make a nice seal. Don't reuse the old O-ring. It's already been compressed and it's not going to have the same tension to create the seal. Okay, I have all 5 of my water pump bolts in just finger tight at this point. You can see I've got a little bit of a gap there. That's going to tighten up as I tighten these up. Now, please don't over tighten these bolts. Get them snug and stop. You're talking inch pounds or very, very minimal foot pounds of torque on this. If you over tighten them, you will break one off, and then you're going to hate yourself because you're going to have a lot of work to do to fix it. Okay, you can see how I've tightened up and taken away all of the gap there. Now, great news. This is the time to refill your coolant and leak check before you put everything else back in. That way, if you have pinched your O-ring, you'll know it pretty much right away, because you'll fill the coolant and it'll start running out. So what we'll do, we're going to tighten up our petcock valve right down here, and we're going to fill the coolant before we put everything back together. Again, it just saves us a lot of work of taking things back apart if we have a leak. Okay, coolant's in. We've verified no leaks. Next step is we got to put our tensioner in, and remember, we're going to put it in and rotate it around the water pump. So you'll go shock absorber first and get it on the other side, then bring it down and around to get this into place. So you can see we've got it around behind the water pump. Now we can simply work it back into place and tighten up the pivot bolt. Okay, now that I've got my pivot bolt in and tight, you're going to put in the bolt that actually holds the shock tensioner and tighten it up. All right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put my pulley on next. Now you said, hey, we took the pulley off way before this earlier. Yeah, we did, but we were using the tension from the belt to help break loose our bolts. The other thing is, it's kind of hard to line up the bolts on the pulley with the bolts in the water pump, or the holes in the water pump, when everything's in your way. And with this off, I can actually line up and kind of see my bolt holes and line up and get my bolts at least started and finger tight right while I'm doing this. And that'll make it immensely easier versus trying to work around the alternator. So we'll put the pulley on and get all the bolts finger tight at this. Okay, now that I have the pulley back in place, next we're going to put the alternator on. I want to show you something real quick. So remember, this is where our nut is. Don't let that fall out. But this piece right here is what actually keeps tension on the alternator. And trying to just shove this back in, it's going to be very tight pushing past this piece. So you want to make it a little easier on yourself. You want to tap this piece back in to the body here. And you can do that either with a little small hammer, take a punch through here and lay something across there and just kind of tap it and knock it back a little bit. You might want to put a little bit of penetrating oil to make it easier. Sometimes you can even take a pair of channel lock pliers and squeeze right there with the pliers to pull it in just slightly. It doesn't have to go in far, but it will make the installation go much easier. Okay, I've recessed that piece just slightly so that I can now simply drop this into place, and you'll see, I mean, it fits right in. There's no problems. I can simply put my 2 bolts in and tighten them up. And that made it a lot easier versus trying to force and wiggle and twist to get that back in. And now that I have my bolts in, what's going to happen is as I tighten this bolt out here, it's going to actually draw that piece back out in order to create a nice tight fit so the alternator isn't going to move anywhere. I'm going to tighten up my 2 alternator bolts and go to that point. Okay. Alternator's tightened up. I'm going to put my wiring back on. This top wire I can simply slide back over this bracket and lock it into place. Hear that nice clip. I'm going to put my power wire back on. My control wires, they're just going to plug back in, and we'll shove our nice boot back over it. They're in place. This is going to go to the air conditioning wiring, which, remember, we took off the brackets there, but this wire is going to slide onto that bracket and lock into place as we shove it forward. And we can connect this wire here, lock it in, heard it clip. Now I'm going to take and install the 2 little 10mm headed bolts on this. The one on the lower one right here. I'm going to put the nut back on the power wire, and I do all that before I reconnect my battery, because if I was working with my ratchet on this and my ratchet was attached to this and hit that, I'm going to create a short. I can burn up the electrical, I can fry the battery, could cause it to explode, and you don't want that because you might die or just be horribly disfigured, which, you know, you might like that. I don't know. I don't. I like to keep my pretty face pretty. So we'll connect everything here before we connect our battery back up. And then the last thing we'll do is install our belt, and remember to tighten up the 3 bolts on the front of our water pump pulley. It is helpful when routing your belt to come down underneath here inside the fender well on the passenger side. And let me get in here and get some focus. You've got 2 tabs that lock to hold a panel on right here. Those are taken out by simply prying out on the center, and I'm sorry the lighting's so bad in here on both of them. With the center pried out, they'll pop right out, and then you can lower this panel and get access to the bottom of the crankshaft pulley and everything else. Now, there is a front tab in there, but I'm going to just pull it down enough that I can see my crankshaft pulley. I can see the bottom of my pulley for my power steering, and where my belt's going to have to roll back up over in between these, so I can take my belt and feed it through those and up onto my tensioner. This will help me route my belt and get everything in place. Okay, with the alternator in, let me explain the belt routing so that we make sure that we get it on properly. So, what the process is, you'll see I've got the alternator with the belt not on it, but I've got everything else lined up. So, from the crankshaft pulley, which you can just see sticking there at the bottom, kind of that below the tensioner bolt, almost in line with it. You'll see it. The belt, the rib side will go around the bottom of the crankshaft pulley, then up and over the water pump pulley with the back side of the belt, the smooth side touching the water pump. Then back down and around the air conditioning pulley with the rib side to the air conditioning pulley. It's going to come up over the alternator pulley, but not until we use the tensioner to release it. From the alternator pulley, the rib side goes towards the alternator and then back, and you'll see down there, over the power steering pulley with the rib side to the power steering pulley. From the power steering pulley, the belt will come up and over the tensioner pulley on the back side or smooth side on the pulley, and then back down and around the crankshaft pulley with the rib side to the crankshaft. So what I've done is I've got it all set in place so that I can put my wrench on the adjuster to relieve pressure. I'll hold tension on the belt to keep everything up and tight so it doesn't fall off one of my other pulleys, and then I'll slide it around my alternator pulley as I relieve the tension. So I'm going to keep tension on it to make sure everything's lined into their pulleys properly. If it's one rib off hanging over the edge, A, it's going to be hard to get on, but B, you definitely got to fix it before you start it. Once you have your belt on, make sure to look and that the belt is aligned with every pulley and fully engaged in each and every pulley. Remember, it takes a lot of force to move this up far enough. Sometimes it's nice to have a friend. You can do it yourself though. I have confidence in you. So now that our belt is on, we're not done yet. We have a few things to finish. We've got to tighten up our 3 pulley bolts. They don't have to be too tight, but they do have to be tight. We also have to put our inner fender back in where we got access to the lower belt. And there we have it. We're all together. Don't forget, make sure you did tighten the 3 bolts on the pulley for the water pump. Make sure you reattached your negative battery cable, and make sure that you reinstalled the inner fender down here so that everything's good. Make sure you also top off your coolant and run it, check it for leaks, make sure the belt's tracking true, and then over the next couple of days keep checking it just in case you have an air pocket somewhere in the system that's not allowing all the coolant in. You want to make sure those come out, so you may have to add a little bit of coolant over the next couple of days. If that continues for weeks, you still have a leak. This is your car guy. Please subscribe to the channel, like and share our videos, especially if you found them helpful. If not, you can just leave a nasty comment and I'll ignore it and we can have some fun. So this is your car guy. Hope you're having a great day and good luck with your Honda Civic.